Very first event of a 4-day-long BC Greens conference and AGM, which I think is unprecedented in our history that we've ever done such a long conference. But we wanted to provide some more educational opportunities for people, and that's what you're taking advantage of. So thank you for coming. I want to first of all also acknowledge that we are on unceded Nanaimo territory. And so we're grateful to be on their territory today for our conference. And yeah, welcome from wherever you come from in BC. One of the reasons we wanted to talk about economics is because, well, it's a huge topic. People have not always understood, actually, what the Green Party has had to say about economics. But it turns out we have to say a lot. This isn't new for us. We've had some very strong economic policy for a very, very long time, and it's only getting more and more important and more developed. And I actually learned about what we're going to be talking about this morning, which is ecological economics, at a BC Green Party sponsored panel discussion back in 2010 in Vancouver on the steady state economy, which actually led to the formation of a number of things in Vancouver, including the Pacific Institute for Ecological Economics, of which Fernanda and Andrew and I are all a part. So it's kind of an interesting way of closing that loop. What goes around comes around. And now here we are in 2015. We're going to talk about it and hopefully shift some paradigms for you. Yeah, ecological economics is, well, you're going to learn more about it. The reason we're talking about shifting the paradigm of economics is probably obvious to most of the people in this room. Since the Green Party started over 30 years ago, we've seen just incredibly rapid rates of degradation of our natural resources, of our biodiversity. You guys all know what's going on. We clearly need to be doing economics in a different way in order to preserve the quality of life for humans and for all life on this planet. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. I'm going to introduce Andrew and Fernanda up here and then get started with the presentation. So Andrew Fanning, who will be starting us off today, is doing his PhD research at the University of Cadiz in Spain. Believe it or not, even though he's here. And he's focused on tracking the indicators of environmental stress and social performance as a means to explore alternatives to growth-based economic policy in Canada and Spain. He's originally from Halifax, and he holds a master's in development economics from Dalhousie University. So welcome, Andrew. And Fernanda, who's also going to be presenting this morning, is also a PhD student at the UBC Faculty of Forestry, where, believe it or not, all the subversive economics UBC is going on these days. And she's researching ways of effectively communicating sustainability concepts to the broader public. She was deeply influenced by the internationally renowned ecological economist Bill Rees, who you may know of as the founder of the ecological footprint concept, and was one of her professors at UBC. And today she's, as I mentioned, working with the Pacific Institute for Ecological Economics to advance ecological economics literacy amongst people of all backgrounds and disciplines. So that's what she's here for today. Welcome, Fernanda. All right, so I think without any further ado, I'm going to invite Andrew to come up, and this should be on your.
We'll find out.
And we'll find you.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Hey,
Thanks a lot.
thank you.
That was possibly the nicest introduction I've ever had. Yeah, so we had a few things for the morning that I guess we had planned for all of you. First of all, thanks a lot for coming. It's exciting for me, and I think Fernanda can join me and Jordan as well but especially as a PhD student, I find life can be fairly fairly solitary, sitting in front of a computer. And I'm really happy to be out speaking to all of you. And I think we're going to have an interesting morning. The idea is essentially, for my part, which may be the easiest, to cover a bit of like more theory and conceptual basis of like what exactly is economics as understood over the past, well, I mean, economics has a fairly long history of 250, 300 years that people have been thinking formally in terms of the issues that we're going to be talking about. And then Fernanda is going to fall into a bit more of a, rather than theory and conceptual, a bit more of the evidence on where we stand, what is our current economic framework, what is it providing in terms of both social performance and environmental implications. And finally, Jordan's going to, I guess, get into a bit more dirty part of what can we do about this, how can we change. What does this mean for policy and all the things that don't really have answers, but we all have ideas about. Okay, so first of all, who here has an idea of economics? I mean, more formally, I guess. Lots of people? Lots of people? Lots of people? Well, that's great. That's great. How many people have heard of ecological economics? Or how many people know who Herman Daly is? That might be a better gauge. Some people I see raising their hands. And how many, these are always difficult. How many people never raise their hand when the speaker asks them to raise their hand? Okay, but how would I know? Very good. So what I plan on going over is more of kind of economic thought as it pertains to the environment. We'll see that historically there hasn't been much economic thought pertaining to the environment, but that I believe economics itself, economic thinking, does have some really strong insights that don't necessarily need to be thrown away, even if the current framework is lacking in some respects. Okay? So I will hopefully be able to click through slides. There we go. Anybody want to hazard a guess? I saw a lot of hands go up. What is economics, if I had to ask you to define it?
Home finances.
Home finances, the management of the household. Okay, that's one.
Science of everything that involves the trade of goods as well as money.
Yeah, it's kind of touching on a guy named Robbins' definition that's pretty famous.
How about science of quality of life?
Science of the quality of life. Okay. I would say we need to get into what provides quality of life. How do we study that?
How we resource ourselves?
How we resource ourselves. That's getting into the whole budget of the household. All right.
Well, I think economics is the study of how human beings make choices in order to maximize their well-being given scarcity and unlimited wants.
I wish I had prizes. I'd have
He's a
little,
cheater.
I have little. That's all I have. You get the prize. Very good. Yes, that is essentially exactly how economics defines itself. It's a study, more officially, it's the study of the allocation of scarce resources among alternative competing ends. There are a few things that economists mean more specifically about these. They're pretty basic, I mean intuitive. The allocation for economists means the process of apportioning resources to the production of different goods and services. So as we have certain resources, how do we use those in such a way to produce goods and services, which are the things that we want? Scarce resources, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, although some resources are not necessarily scarce in an economic sense, which has led economists to try and tackle that. A key example would be information. That information is a resource that essentially my use of it in no way diminishes your potential use of it. And actually, my use could even make it better if I improve that information. So it's not scarce in an economic sense, and we'll talk more about its characteristics of goods throughout the session today. Finally, competing ends. This is one of the most important things, is that economic decisions always take place in the context of trade-offs. So that if there's no choice, there's no economic decision to be made. Essentially, it's easy. You just do what you got to do. In economics, you always are looking at, you want multiple things, and you have to balance between, because you only have a limited supply of resources, you have to make choices about how much of all the things that you want can be made. And it's that balancing of how we make our decisions that really defines the study of economics. More briefly, the economics is about what we want and what we have to, or what we're willing to give up to get it. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Interestingly, the overlap with politics is very, very strong. And I mean, economists of today have tried pretty hard to make their discipline separate from politics. But a very famous definition of politics, I'm sure you've probably heard. Can anyone define politics? What is a very famous one that says, politics is about who gets what and when. So I mean, as we can see, the overlap is very large. Okay, so I wanted to touch on economic problems versus technical problems, because I said if there's no choice, then it's essentially not an economic problem. It's a technical problem. An example of that I really like is to think about building the most powerful engine. Right? It's essentially a technical problem. Your goal is to build a powerful engine. But as soon as you want to take the most powerful engine and say you want to make that engine light enough so that an aircraft could carry it, that's now, even if you're in engineering, that's now an economic problem, because the goal has now shifted. You want to make an airplane fly, but in order to reach that goal, you would have to optimize the most powerful engine versus lightness in order to take flight. So that's kind of an idea of how to think about economic problems as optimization problems. So I wanted to take a step back a little bit, a very big step back, into the largest economic problem, if you can think about it. I really, really enjoy this framework. I'm going to try to explain it. I think it's really useful for situating the human economy within a hierarchy, resting, so to speak, on a foundation of natural resources, but that also reaches to the heights of almost ultimate purpose. Like, why? Why are we here? What are we doing? So I'm going to try to explain it a bit. I said it's a hierarchy, so it's resting on the base of what, this is by the man named Herman Daly. It's called its ends means framework. He mentions the ultimate means. Like, what does human society have? It's essentially natural capital. It's the provision of useful stuff that ecosystems provide. And the really important part of that is that we can't make that. That the ecosystem just provides, he uses the term low entropy, but just useful resources that we can take and transform, but that we cannot create. Okay? What we do with those ultimate means, as he calls them, is transform them into intermediate means. I've circled this part here because it's almost like the life of the everyday. So what do? We transform them into material stocks of artifacts and skilled labor, which are kind of like the capacity of the economy to produce goods and services. Okay? From then on, what do we do with the goods and services? I should add that almost in this sense, this is the realm of the natural sciences. So we use technology to transform resources into intermediate means. We use physics, biology, chemistry. From intermediate means into intermediate ends, how do we allocate our resources? How do we decide which resources go to which ends? That, I would argue, is the realm of economics and of politics. The intermediate ends would be the goods and services that society relies on the economy, or actually the government's promise to provide. Can you imagine, can you think of just examples of what are intermediate ends within this framework? What would be something we all rely upon? Governments. Healthcare. Yeah, exactly. Anything else?
Education.
Education. These key things that we all recognize are necessary. Quality of life was mentioned. Necessary components of a quality of life. We need safety. We need health, education, wealth. I mean, we require a certain level of financial, in our case in a market economy, financial comfort. All of those things would be called intermediate ends. Then he takes it a step further, essentially into the realm of ethics and religion and philosophy, into what is the ultimate end? Like, what is, like, I don't have the answer, but what are health, education, and safety, and financial comfort and stability? What are they for? Why? Again, I don't have the answer for you, but
Well, I think it's because we value life.
we value life, sure. That could be, yeah, but again, it's almost trying to get at that intrinsic good, like why do we value life? What is good about life?
Go on forever.
Exactly. So these three are fairly well defined, I would say. In ultimate means, it's the provision of low entropy resources. Intermediate means is capital stocks and skilled labor, and intermediate ends, health, safety, these important things that we all recognize. For what? That's not so easy to define, but nevertheless, it's very, very important, and it's our organizing principle. A lot of people would say, I'm going to use the term essentially human well-being. That human well-being is, in and of itself, a good thing. That even if we can't necessarily define exactly what human well-being is. Okay, so these ideas of welfare, utility, well-being, they capture the essence, but essentially it's a qualitative concept, and you can't really measure qualitative measures. Okay? So that's essentially the very, very big picture. We've taken science, economics, politics, ethics, religion. It's overwhelming in its inclusiveness, which is why we've separated it into disciplines. Okay? So that's the ultimate problem in the very, very big picture. That doesn't this arrow work, man?
Oh, there.
There we go. So what have mainstream economists done to try and answer these issues? Right? We're all very critical, but I think there's we should commend the people who have been trying to grapple with these ideas. So, if economics is about what we want and what we have to give up to get it, mainstream economists are going to present in a slide their argument. So what do we want? I would argue that we want human well-being. We want, the conventional term is utility or welfare. But we want that, it's intrinsically good. Does that make sense? So how much do we want of it? I already heard of scarcity. I placed up here the scarcity principle. Can anyone define what that means to economists? What is scarcity? What the principle of scarcity?
Not being able to supply what everybody wants.
Exactly. Exactly.
Supply what everybody wants.
Essentially, the one I think from my textbook would be that it's two things really. One is that human beings have unbounded wants. That we have unlimited wants, but only limited resources. And that is the very basis of economics, because unlimited wants meeting limited resources means that you have to make choices. So how much do we want of human well-being? The short answer is we want an unlimited amount. That if we can have as much as we can, then great. Right? Well, why wouldn't I be happier to be better off? And finally, how do we measure it? How do we measure it? Because I already mentioned that utility or well-being, it's a qualitative concept, and you can't measure quality. As soon as you try to measure quality, it becomes quantity, because that's just the nature of it. So economists, I think, have tried to come up with an idea for how to get at what people's preferences are. And they look at market transactions. Can anyone tell me why you would look at market transactions as a way to get at utility or well-being? There are two big reasons. One, go ahead.
Well, they're objective, because there's a dollar, there's a number attached to it, and that reflects the work that people put on something,
Yeah,
what they're willing to pay.
yeah, exactly. It's the idea of that. I think when you say objective, it's that it almost gets past what people say and really gets at how they act. They call them revealed preferences. The reason why that's considered objective is because people can say a lot of things, but at the end of the day, what is it that you, given your limited budget, actually do? So market transactions are a good way of capturing that. There's another key part of why economists focus on markets. I mean, you will hear that markets are very important all the time. Why are markets so good? Are they're just better than anything else? Or why do we like markets from an economic point of view? Anyone tell me?
Is that tells the economy or economists what it is that is selling and what people are heading towards in terms of what they want.
Yeah, it's
First you have to tell me what you really mean by a market, though.
that's right. It's kind of it's the meeting of demand, what people want, with the supply of what's available. One key thing that economists have managed to do is to, under certain assumptions, markets are efficient. That they can achieve an efficient outcome, an efficient allocation of resources. And the reason why that's good is because efficiency to economists means that there is no other situation where this distribution of resources could be improved without making someone else worse off. So the goal of efficiency is, I didn't explain it very well there. Essentially, it's the way of saying that you have organized your resources in such a way that there's no way to make someone better off without making someone else worse off, if that makes sense. Okay?
So do you mean somebody's improvement is always at the expense of someone's?
After that point, but it's arguably, there's nothing wrong with hitting that point, I would say, because if you're below an efficient outcome, that means that you can make someone better off without making anyone else worse off. So why shouldn't you do that? So efficiency as a goal is a good use of resources, I would say. The problem with that is, maybe you can tell me, how about for revealed preferences in market transactions, what's missing?
Externality.
Externalities. What is an externality? Is it
Carbon.
Okay. Yeah. An externality is typically defined as a if you've made a transaction between two people, then an externality would be if there's an effect of that on a third person who had no input into this voluntary transaction that you original two people made. So in this case carbon would be my emission of carbon is having an effect on other people through a change of climate.
Markets also don't tell you what people actually need. So I see markets today in North America as simply transactions for the relatively wealthy, whereas the poor people are totally excluded from our current markets. They can't afford to buy stocks.
Very good.
So there's
Okay.
absolutely nothing there for poor people.
Okay. We'll touch on. I would make that broader
Yes.
and say that markets only reveal preferences for goods and services that are traded in markets. Lots of things are not traded in markets. And economics as measured in this way will not capture any of those because it's outside the measure of well-being. So it implicitly argues that things that are not traded in markets have little or no value, which is a problem. Externalities comes into it where you can say, okay, well if these things are not traded in markets, what we need to do is bring them into the market system. That's one approach that we'll talk about. We can talk about others as well. The end result through the mainstream economic view is that I should also mention about efficiency, actually. Efficiency is sometimes, it is viewed as a goal, I can tell you from my experience in economics, is that it's viewed as the goal. It's where economists see their contribution as a discipline, is to organize yourself most efficiently. However, you could argue that efficiency as a goal, it's not really an end in and of itself, because it only counts to be efficient at something if your end is good. It's no use being efficient at something that's not worth doing, for example. So I would say that, and at the end of the day, the mainstream economic argument comes out with well-being is increased through the ever greater through scarcity. We always want increasing well-being. Ever greater provision of goods and services as measured by their market value. Okay? Does that all make sense? Kind of what the conventional... I don't want to bash them too much because it's grappling with some big ideas and taking a look in the context of when the ideas were made in the 18th century. It was undeniably an advance in our understanding of how to increase well-being.
Sure.
Okay? This button is not.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So now that we've talked about the conventional view, I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about the idea of paradigms. Jordan mentioned in the introduction, we're going to ask, maybe you have already hold a different paradigm from what mainstream economists have, but this idea of what is a worldview, or what is a paradigm, I think is important to talk about. It's defined by Schumpeter, a guy, Joseph Schumpeter in the 50s, as pre-analytic worldview that supplies the raw material for subsequent analysis. So this is essentially your culture, your way of viewing the world has an influence on how you conduct analyses that oftentimes we can tell ourselves are objective, but they're always informed by a pre-analytic view, which we call a paradigm. What if you're missing something? Because all analysis is a model. It commits simplifying assumptions. Anytime you try and think of a large issue, or any models, you're going to make assumptions. So what if you miss something from your pre-analytic vision. The main idea is that there's no level of analysis that you can conduct in that paradigm that can make up for what you've missed from the beginning. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. How many people have seen this image before? Okay. What is it? Is it a duck? Is it a rabbit? What's that? It's a dodo bird?
It could be a rabbit.
Is it a rabbit as well?
Yeah.
Huh. I think that it's a good.
It's an animal.
Very good. That image is an example of what's called a gestalt. A guy, Thomas Kuhn, was writing about paradigm shifts in the 60s, I believe. And a paradigm shift to him, well, to me as well, he's convinced me, is essentially it's the end result of crises in scientific disciplines due to anomalies. What is an anomaly? An anomaly is something that's not explained under the current paradigm. Okay, it's just kind of, it's over there, it doesn't really fit, it might be the data, might be, what are some examples of paradigm shifts? Oh, I should also mention a paradigm shift is also always better. It's always able to explain what was previously explained under the previous paradigm, but it's also able to account for these growing anomalies. Okay? So it's not an issue. He mainly talks about in scientific disciplines because in the world of ethics and philosophy there are different points of view, no one of which is better. Whereas more in the sciences, you can have the case where you've now explained something in a broader and more inclusive way. So what are examples?
The world is flat, the world is round.
The world is flat, the world is round. Exactly. Yeah, you would say also the heliocentric view, the Ptolemy versus Copernicus.
Yeah.
Does the sun go around the earth or does the earth go around the sun? That was a major shift because things didn't add up. But why is Jupiter over there right now if they're not there? What else? How many other?
The movement from humans from hunter-gatherers to agriculture.
Sure.
But that would not be an anomaly, that's a development.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that would fit exactly in when we're talking. I've never heard it as an example.
Darwin and Origin of Species, that
Evolution, yeah. The evolution versus, I wouldn't say versus creationism, but evolution versus the previous, more, what was it?
Like Lamarckian evolution?
Yeah, exactly. Lamarck versus Darwin. Another one being Newton versus Einstein, right? Like Newton's physics was able to explain the world that we live in, but Einstein took it to a level that explains a much broader understanding that also encompasses Newton's view, right? So that's what a paradigm shift is, and that's what I would argue is needed in economics right now, where what we need is not just, we can't conduct more analysis by bringing in externalities and that type of stuff, but what's needed is actually a change in the whole paradigm of how economists view the economy. So how do economists view the economy? How many people have seen this image? I apologize if it's not very clear, if it's too small. I know that all of you who raise your hands about economics, I'm sure have seen this image. This is what's called the circular flow model. It takes, in its most simple form, these bottom ones are typically there. You have firms and you have households. And this is just before I start, it's a very, very strong, very powerful conceptual tool that underpins essentially all of our economy, our economic accounts, our ideas about economic policy, just everything essentially based in this image. Where you have households, you have firms. Households demand goods and services. Firms supply goods and services. The meeting of demand and supply in markets, the goods market, allocates resources towards those ends. On the other hand, firms demand factors of production, one of which is labor, and households own their labor, so they provide it. So in labor markets, demand meets supply, and markets allocate resources most efficiently. So it's actually, this model manages to connect the very large with the individual decisions taking place in markets, which is a really strong thing, actually. I mean, if you ask any physicist, connecting the very small to the very large is something that's we still don't have a unified theory upon. So it's a big deal, but it also has its limitations we'll talk about. One of which being that obviously the economy is not just firms and households, right? We also have banks, we have private finance. So these lower ones, this is as complicated as the picture gets. And I'm sorry to have thrown it, but I think it's important to go over all of it. Firms and households, then you have savings and investment, right? Households don't just spend all of what they want, they save some. And then banks, or the private finance market, hangs onto that and redirects it into other activities, right? Into firms through investment. Next, we also have governments, right? As you all know, that's why we're here. Governments also tax people, and they use those taxes to provide government services. Finally, we also have international finance, where not every given economy produces all it has, but we also import and we export. So those markets all together form the circular flow diagram. And why is this such a useful thing? Because it has been incredibly useful, I have to say. The main reason? Everything balances. So if you look at, just look at these ones. This is the realm of microeconomics, the goods markets and the factors of production. The idea is that in theory, if everything was working, these would be equal. Why is that a powerful thing? Because if they're not equal, then we can say, there's something I can do here. There's an externality. I can address that. Or, for example, the field of resource economics is typically involved in the factors of production. It's how do we account for natural resources in such a way that they're better captured in markets. The field of environmental economics typically views ecosystem services as things that need to be brought into the goods and service market. So you put a value on them. What are people willing to pay to have a certain water purification service, or whatever it may be. In the world of savings and investment, obviously, if you're not saving as much as you're investing, then you're going to go into debt. So then, it's providing that policy lever that have arguably, these last three, led to the unprecedented material wealth over the past 60 or 70 years since this has been synthesized. Okay? Has anyone heard of John Maynard Keynes? Okay. Well, he was instrumental in all of this. I would argue that much of our current economic structure in the world is based on these ideas. Economic policy in and of itself, from a government perspective, really came to be through his ideas of these policy levers. So it's a very, very important model and way of seeing the world. What's missing? Okay, and that would be the next one. You know, it's the trick of being a PhD student, is you forget that people don't know all the vocabulary and everything. So why is it called the expansionist paradigm? What's missing from this image? It's very powerful, it's great, it provides economic policy. What's not there?
An indication of the resources available?
Well, you could argue that it's, if resources are a factor of production, then
But because the household doesn't have infinite factors of production available to transfer to the farms.
that would be the big question, right? It only captures resources that are traded in markets. But where do the resources come from? Right? So that's kind of the idea. And it's called the expansionist paradigm because if you look at it, this view of the economy, and economists think of the economy in these broad terms, right? It's viewed as an isolated system, in which case it's called expansionist because there's nothing stopping it from growing. It's isolated, it could just keep growing and growing and growing as long as markets, the determination of supply and demand, and will, as long as they allow for it. So there's nothing to hold it back at the macro scale. So that's why it's called expansionist, is that it can keep expanding.
But you put it in quotation marks.
Why did I put it in quotation? That might be a clue that I think there might be something to stop it from expanding. Which I'm going to get into right now. Okay, but first, before I do, does that all make sense? Mainstream economics, kind of how economists view the world, and why I believe it's important.
Well,
And
it's really
next,
important to understand it because it's how we got in the mess we are.
exactly, because although it provides these really strong policy levers, what's it missing? Right? How are we in this mess? Why isn't it getting it? Well, the next one would be what ecological economics, the ecological paradigm, essentially views the same circular flow diagram, except that what's powering the flow, right? Because what ecological economists say is that this model, the circular flow model, is physically impossible. There's no such thing as a perpetual motion machine. The second law of thermodynamics says that entropy in a system will always be, in a closed system, will always be increased. Entropy being just like randomness or disorganization. So that no system is able to power itself indefinitely without an outside source. Just can't be done. There's no such thing. To put it in biological terms, we are unable to eat our excretions and remain viable as entities. The idea repulses us. No? So ecological economists say, look, that's all fine and good, but we're missing, probably because of back in the 18th century, it wasn't such a big deal, because the limiting factor was more like the how to increase well-being. But now, maybe we've gotten to a point where we need to worry about what's powering this. And what's powering it is clearly available energy and materials, which are taken in from the sustaining and finite ecosystem, the finite ecosphere, which would be this box around the economy is limiting its expansion. So that's where we get our energy and materials, but I mean, they don't just stay in the economy, they are also released as waste, as high entropy and heat, degraded and dissipated energy and matter. That's essentially the only change. It's instead of viewing the economy as a whole, isolated system, it views the economy as a part of an encompassing ecosphere. The economy itself being an open system, open in the sense that it accepts energy and materials and gives out energy and materials in the form of heat and degraded matter. Whereas the ecosphere would arguably be what in the world of thermodynamics they call a closed system. Closed meaning that it takes in energy and gives off energy, like the planet. We get energy from the sun. But there's not much material flow through the planet itself. I mean, Herman Daly jokes that we have a rocket that leaves every now and then, or a meteor crash lands, but for the most part the planet is...
I must have missed something. What does low entropy and high entropy mean?
Okay, great question. Sorry, it's a bit more technical. Entropy is essentially the measure of organization of any structure. Call it a molecule. It's essentially a measure of quality. It's what separates a pile of useful stuff from a equal weight of useless stuff. Does that make sense?
So low entropy is useful.
Low entropy is useful. High entropy, useless.
I think the easiest way for me to remember that is if you look at a skyscraper, that would be high entropy, right? If it falls apart, it will eventually fall apart. That's low entropy, isn't it?
The opposite, actually.
Yeah, okay.
The entropy is the measure of randomness,
Right.
Or you can think of it as chaos.
chaos.
Yes.
Sure. And so, actually, a skyscraper is a very, very low entropy device. Like it's very highly structured.
Yes.
Okay, but entropy is also called times arrow.